Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are coming to you this week with my last episode before I go on maternity leave. Today we will start by interviewing Adam Schwarze, who is one of the Republicans running for the U.S. Senate seat that will be open following Tina Smith announcing she is not seeking re-election. With Adam, we will break down his background, why he decided to run for state office, and why he thinks he is the best candidate to represent our state in the U.S. Senate. Following our interview, we will touch on Governor Walz's 7th State of the State address from this week. We would be remiss to not discuss the results of the recent Senate District 6 primary election that saw 8 Republicans face off to determine who would go on into the general for the special election to replace disgraced former Senator Justin Eichhorn. Then we are going to break down the ongoing drama within the Republican Party of Minnesota and the far-right wing group Action for Liberty. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Becky, this is a very special show because tomorrow you're having a kid.
I'm having my second baby.
So you're going to be off the show. Let's start with the most important thing. Give our listeners an estimate on how long you may be away from the show.
We're going to play it by ear, but probably a month, maybe 2. We'll see how things are going. I think after my last maternity leave, I was itching to use the brain power a little bit. I'm certainly going to be listening, following along, watching what goes on at the end of session here with the special elections and who's announcing that they're running for governor or Senate. There's going to be a whole lot of excitement over the next couple of months. So I have a feeling I'm going to be itching to share some thoughts on it, which might just be having to be messaging you and some others, my thoughts and opinions to share with the world. But yeah, we'll hopefully come back sooner than later.
But absent me breaking this podcast or landing in jail or something, it's your intention to come back.
It is.
First of all, let me say you're going to be missed. And I also want to share with you a little something we talked about before we recorded is that I've spoken to a number of men this week, and they were, along with me, blown away that you were doing the podcast this week, knowing that you're going to be having a kid soon. We all came to the conclusion that none of us would be showing up if we were soon to be having a kid. And it is simply remarkable that you're here and you've continued to do this podcast. And I just want to say, I wish you nothing but the best health and safety for you, your family, and the new addition to your family, and that everything goes just perfect.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'll be sure to share some updates with you to share on upcoming episodes. And thanks for holding down the fort. You're going to do a great job keeping the train on the track. So I'm excited to follow along and grateful that you're willing to put in the work while I'm gone. And yeah, we're excited. We're having our second boy and just going to live in bliss and chaos for the next couple of, years.
Just to be clear, and I'll mention this again at the end of the show, the breakdown gets exclusivity, right? First interview. And have you guys signed off on any streaming that can be done, just reporting live outside or anything? This is news. We have to break news.
No, nothing of that sort. We're just going to go in, have the baby. I'm going to get my Jimmy John's cold deli sandwich that I've been craving for 9 months. And and enjoy everything newborn. And then introduce big brother Wyatt to the baby. And so I'll have lots of stories to share in just a matter of days.
One quick sidebar. You mentioned deli meat. It was Easter this past weekend. And if we could just for just a moment or two, remind our listeners, Becky is a ham eater. I think ham is a subpar. I want to give a shout out to my in-laws, my relatives down in Iowa. They served both a turkey and a ham this Easter. And because they listened to the podcast, I just wanted to say thank you. That was just such a welcome addition. And it really shows the reach of this podcast that you can influence. It was a total surprise. I showed up and there was a turkey there. And I was just blown away. And
so lovely.
Yes. And who says a podcast can't change the world?
One family at a time.
But it brought up a discussion, which is deli meats.
Yes.
That's something that...
So it's kind of everything this day and age is take it with a grain of salt. They recommend no raw fish sushi, no cold deli meat. You can have it if you warm it up. There's all sorts of runny yolks, no soft cheeses, unpasteurized cheeses, all of these sort of things. Now, I'm in a lot of... I'm in a lot of mom groups online, and there are a lot of women who do indulge in these things. They say if you can get raw fish from a reputable place, to be honest, there's been more listeria outbreaks from romaine lettuce than deli meat over the last year or two. I'm just an anxious being in general, and I couldn't, to me, it's just, let's just avoid and reduce risks in general. No shame to anybody. You do you, whatever you feel comfortable with under the advisement of your doctor. But I have not had a cold deli meat. And let me tell you, when you are nauseous and have morning sickness and can eat very few things, a cold sandwich just sounds great. Sometimes I love a good hot ham and cheese and all of that, but it is something that I have been thinking about more than wine or whiskey or any other indulgence. I want my Jimmy John's, and so I will be having that within hours of having this baby.
Wonderful. I hope everything goes well. All of our listeners, my family, will keep you and your family in our thoughts and prayers.
Thank
And
you.
let's have a great show.
Perfect. We are excited to welcome first time guest Adam Schwarze to the podcast. Now, Adam, you are one of the Republicans who are running for the soon to be open U.S. Senate seat. Tina Smith is going to be retiring. We're seeing a flurry of conversation about who's running right, left, and center. But talk to us. I want to start with, before we even get into why you decided to do this, tell us who you are and a little bit about your background and how you came to be sitting here today.
Okay. Thanks for having me on, Becky and Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. Becky, congratulations in order for
Thank
the
you.
stuff you have in your personal life behind the scenes. That's just amazing, and congratulations. But Adam Schwarze, I was raised in Bloomington, Minnesota. An important vignette of my life story is I was adopted. My mom was really young when she had me, originally from Annandale. She put me up for adoption at 6 months old, and then I was raised by parents in Bloomington, Minnesota. And in 2001, I was in my senior year class of high school at Bloomington Kennedy and watched the Twin Towers fall in real time. I was actually already on the pathway to join the military service, but like a lot of other Americans, really emboldened by that national tragedy. So a month later, on my 18th birthday, I enlisted in the Marine Corps infantry option. Did all 5 phases of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Then did some time doing some interagency work with the Department of State, and we're fortunate to have just really phenomenal mentors who recognized some leadership potential in me. And then in 2009, I was selected from the top 1% of the enlisted Marine Corps to get a degree. I came back home to University of Minnesota, where I got to be a big brother. Later on, my parents had 3 other children, my biological parents now, and I met them after I was a Marine as an adult, came back to be a big brother to them. They're much younger than I am. And then in 2012, I was selected from about 15,000 candidates. I was one of 15 to get selected as a Naval Special Warfare, or more colloquially known as a SEAL officer. And then 2012 is when I fully completed all my requirements to be commissioned as a naval officer and transitioned from like the sexy Marine Corps dress blue uniform to the milkman Navy officer uniform, commissioned as a naval ensign in 2012. Did a couple of deployments with SEAL Team 3. And then in 2016, I was selected from the Junior Officer Corps and the SEAL Corps to join this entity I'll just call Naval Special Warfare Undersea, but they do great power competition, near peer competitor missions against Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. They solve generally national priority intelligence requirements. You cannot screw these missions up because you're going against a near peer competitor. A lot is on the line nationally and strategically. We didn't. So a lot of quiet W's for America behind the scenes. And then to be transparent, my very good career, 18 and a half year career where I was the number one person at every command I worked with and worked for, was stymied and ended because of COVID. And then because my desire to correct America and support America, that has not ceased. I've recognized some leadership in government, and really that's a so what of my political story is after my career was ended because of COVID. I'm still emboldened to serve America. I still want to do great things that are impactful, but now instead of the bad guys are the target, no, our problem truly poor leadership and governance. And I'm an honest broker. That is largely, depending on the issue, a bipartisan problem. But if you look at even the post results of this last presidential election, there's clearly one party that the Americans identify with as being more solutions based. And there is one party, and I'm talking about the Democrats now, who they are just rudderless and they're not putting forth policies that support Americans, the American way of life, benefiting Americans writ large. And so that's when I became involved in politics in 2022 is when I finally was able to separate from the military. On my way out, I got a master's in Harvard in international relations, another couple master's certificates in international security and nuclear deterrence. And then most recently, this last year, I wrapped up an MBA at Johns Hopkins. So of a unique intersection between being there on the ground, 9 deployments, over 75 countries. I've been to all 7 continents, 5 master's degrees and programs, an academic level cross section of policy and being there, if you will.
Wow. First of all, thank you for your service. And that was probably the most impressive tell us about yourself answer that we've ever received. Basically, you're Captain America. So thank you. First of all, thank you in all seriousness for your service.
Thanks for your support.
And that's remarkable. But my goodness gracious, what an impressive resume. And the camera caught the reaction as I was hearing you recite what your accomplishments were. And my goodness, you have a very distinguished background.
Thanks. It sounds really cool on paper, but I promise I'm just like an everyday average American. Minnesotans generally do really well in the SEAL pipeline because we're raised on good Midwest work ethic and values. Truly, I know you guys are looking at me like I'm crazy, and I appreciate you're humbling me, but really, it's just we don't quit. We build good teams. We show up every day, and if you look at, I know you two are very involved in politics and are very savvy. I think some of those traits are really analogous to putting together a winning political team. And I think that shows in the results from when veterans, specifically Navy SEALs, when they run for office. We went 5 for 7 in the last midterm general elections. And last cycle, we went 1 for 1. I hope, knock on wood, I don't change that. We haven't lost a U.S. Senate race yet. And again, it's really because we build teams, we show up early, we care about the mission. And then what I'm really proud about right now is I'm building out a team with great members that have buy-in to the end state.
I'm going to come back and circle back to some of that because I think that's a great conversation. But I do want to get into how, in particular, when this seat opened up, why a statewide race, it's a big, heavy lift. We know it's a lot of time, a lot of money needed. You're building out an awesome team. What particularly about this and about serving the state and the country in a different way appealed to you so much?
Yeah, great question, Becky. The bottom line up front is I was impacting America in a very strategic fashion before, putting up some wins on the battlefield and then policy and then intelligence missions for America. But those are pretty small scale to the outsized impact I could make as a federal servant to the people in Congress or the U.S. Senate. So this is the biggest mission I've ever been a part of. And I've been a part of some pretty big, important missions. But getting elected to the United States Senate, I don't think people who are paying attention to politics, specifically in Minnesota, would say that some of our leaders in the governance state level or in the federal level have Minnesotans that are Americans' best interests at heart. I've been a fighter for America, for a constitution my whole life. And frankly, if you had to ask me 20, 30 years ago before I got immersed into politics and really learned both the philosophical differences and what it means to be a constitutional conservative, my actual political foundation, I probably would have aligned with maybe a Democrat or certainly that's had very laissez-faire social constructs, fiscally was more responsible. But certainly as I've gotten involved in the values, my own personal value system as a man, but then what does it mean to put policies forward? And really, again, back to leadership, I definitely have very strong values and I'm hoping to do very good things for America in this lane of effort.
Fantastic. And I feel very similar. A constitutional conservative, sometimes a little more social on some of the, or moderate on some of the social issues, but really seeing what the Democrats have really done. And it gets a little scary. And so I want to, from somebody who has spent on the Republican side in particular, we know there's going to be a primary. We know there's going to be a handful, if not dozen, of Republican candidates in this race. But one thing that we've seen an appetite for from Republican delegates, from constituents, from Minnesotans on the right in particular is somebody who is going to fight. Talk to us a little bit about that. Somebody who is willing to stand up, to have those hard conversations, to really fight for what is right for Minnesota business owners, Minnesota families. Talk to us about how your past really translates well into that fighter that Republicans are looking for in their candidate.
Frankly, I think, Becky, you should be on my comms team. That's truly it. People want a fighter for their values. And I think that's why people generally, especially on the conservative side, they look to Marines, they look to Navy SEALs as, hey, that guy or gal has spent fighting for the Constitution. They've been fighting for America. These are uncomfortable conversations. This is an uncomfortable job. I'm very used to being in uncomfortable situations. Doing a 12-hour dive in 34-degree water, you have a lot of soul searching when you're in that blackness and that depth and that cold. These are very uncomfortable positions, but certainly now I'm just traveling around the state, meeting good, hardworking American citizens, Minnesotans, business owners, like you said, that want to be thriving and have the government out of their lives again, parents that want to be back and feel like they control their children's education and not have these special interest groups in their classrooms. So this is actually a much easier, way more comfortable job. It's definitely a heavy lift, as you said. It's not as sexy, but it's a lot easier to go just have these conversations with Minnesotans who you act very acutely are right. They want a fighter. And I'm a constitutional conservative. There are hills that I will die on. First Amendment, Second Amendment rights. Those are hills that I absolutely die on. And I think I have the ability with being also adopted. Like, I know that the value of life on this planet. I'm living proof that if you give life an opportunity, great things can happen. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm coalescing a team, for as long as I can, I actually don't plan to talk negatively about the candidates that are involved or the candidates that may or may not don't get involved. I'm doing my own thing. I'm building a brand. I'll go on your show. I'll go on every other show I can, just say, this is who I am. These are the values I stand for. These are the things that I've done for America so far. But this is what I want to do. And I think that message is really resonating with the grassroots, with the delegates, as somebody that has done a lot. Hey, they sacrificed a lot. But this is where my value systems are. But this is where I want to take America.
That ties in greatly to my question, which is Republicans haven't won statewide since 2006. And so the question I have is, how are you formulating yourself as a candidate and as a team to end that long statewide drought that Republicans have had?
Great question. I think politics, specifically at the federal level, it's three things. It's being able to coalesce a base, which is difficult in Minnesota because, to be transparent, our base of our party, we are very fractured currently. But I look at that as that's a leadership issue. That's my leadership burden. And I think, again, my message is, I don't care if you're one of the more moderates. I don't care if you're the farthest screaming right or anything in between. And frankly, even if you're an independent Democrat, I'm carving a place for you on our team right now. That's truly priority one, is to earn support of everybody across the political spectrum. I also need to do that well enough to get donors involved and to raise money not only in Minnesota, who are disenfranchised with our winning rate in the past, get them excited about a fresh new brand, a fresh new candidate, raise outstate money, which is, I think, I uniquely have an ability to do with my brand. Also, the Navy SEAL, the veteran, the Marine brand has the ability to raise nationally money. Again, that's why 5 of 7 Navy SEALs flipped last midterms and we won one for one in the Senate. The SEAL brand does lend itself to raising money nationally. And then I am also working towards to get President Trump's endorsement and get Washington to also buy in. Hey, Minnesota is a winner. Adam Schwarze, he's going to be a great candidate. Let's get on board early. And then Washington, they signal out to all the other national donors, the other political apparatuses to get involved. And I think that is also a unique thing I have. I've already having some of those conversations with the NRSC, and I'm not going to speak for them, but they like our team and what we got going on. And I'm trying to get them to signal, hey, get early and lean into Minnesota because we've got a real opportunity here.
It's a great answer. A fantastic answer. Becky.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that we on the Republican side we tend to see a lot of former legislators, former politicians, and candidates running small business owners. I can't, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, I can't remember in recent history having somebody with this robust of a military background really jump in and ready to go. And so I think that unique background does lend itself well to these different audiences who we are looking to capture, who we're looking to engage. We obviously know that whether you love them or hate them as a Republican, the Trump lane, the MAGA lane is an important part of this path to victory, the path to nomination for the Republican side. So that's certainly going to be something it sounds like you're already working all of the right angles, the national groups, the state groups, the delegates, the donors, which is exciting because obviously we also know that going up against currently Peggy Flanagan, but also potentially and Melissa Franzen, we know that Angie Craig's still considering, and the left certainly does have a very successful fundraising apparatus. And so the donors are going to be crucial to that. Love to hear that you're already working on that. I want to continue on leaning into a little bit about your background because I have to imagine over 21 years in the military and 75 countries visited, you've seen a lot around the world, a lot of
Yeah,
things that
yeah, you
that
can say that.
a lot of things that work in countries, a lot of things that don't work in countries. I talk to us a little bit about how that kind of rounds out your political and policy viewpoints of what you believe that is important for Minnesota and America.
Yes, thank you. You're right. I've seen all the other countries, the majority of the countries around the world. I think that America, our great American experiment, is so beautiful and unique. And as I learned the more about the Constitution, how our country was founded, and how our founding fathers were so wise beyond their years to have the three branches of government, to have them always in friction, to have our two parties. And it's certainly not perfect, but it is better than every other country I've been to. And I credit it to, in the military, we say the in order to become an expert or a master of any craft, you have to first master your fundamentals. And I think that the U.S. Constitution is a fundamentally beautiful document. And that's kind of the foundation for the rest of our country and our values and how we've been so successful up to this point. And I think that is probably the largest reason why we're starting to fail as a country as well, is we're getting farther away from that document and those guiding principles, which is what made us this great country to begin with. And I hope to be a bipartisan and an honest broker. That's really what I want my brand to be. But to call it balls and strikes, again, I think that there's one party that is trying to get back to that. It recognizes that we're getting too far and straying from that fundamental document, and the other party is wholeheartedly abandoning that. And again, you go to a Democrat convention, how many Hamas flags are they flying to how many American flags are they flying? It's sad that party is so rudderless. And to be, again, very honest, I wish that there was another philosophical party that we could bounce things off of and then figure out a way forward. But right now, it's crazy. They don't stand for anything. And then that allows us to go all over the place instead of being honed in on what the things we should really be focused in on as well, and have a focused effort and a unified team.
That's a fantastic answer. Fantastic answer. Now, there's an endorsement process, there's a primary process. Where do you see this race shaping up in terms of a one-on-one race message? What's the message contrast that you think you'll offer Minnesotans, and what do you think the key issues will be in that race? Whether it's Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, former state senator Melissa Lopez Franzen, or former or current Congresswoman Angie Craig. What would a Schwarze debate be like with one of those, and what will be some of the issues that you think will be center in a debate or in a contrast discussion with one of those candidates?
Yeah, for the endorsement process in Minnesota, I know there's some talk about them changing both the DFL and the Minnesota legislature. From the talks I've had with people in the Minnesota legislature, I don't predict that changing, but you didn't ask it, but I'm willing to say it. I think I'm going for the endorsement. I think the endorsement is critical to building our team. I truly believe that. I know a lot of candidates say that and then they don't abide by it later on, but I truly think that one of my pillars for this whole winning in the general is building the team and earning the support right now of the delegates. So I'm happy to say that I'm going for the endorsement. I plan to win the endorsement. If it does change the process, or if somebody does jump in late, I'll win the primary too, dang it. But when we're talking about how I'm going to contrast myself to the other side, to whether it's Peggy Flanagan or Angie Craig, truthful, I am trying to be the pragmatic and common sense candidate. If there's something that's radical about me, it's about my patriotism, my love for our country, how much I've sacrificed on the battlefield, how much blood, sweat, and tears I've left in battles. I have a lot at stake in our country, and I'm not willing to let it fail. And if you look at what I'm running for, it's a strong economy, independent energy, to have control of your children and making sure that they're getting a good education. Borders do matter. And again, we I love America. Our side loves America. And if you look at the Peggy Flanagan, the no country, no person's illegal on stolen land, and boys should be in girls' sports, Peggy Flanagan and Tim Walz, they're spending millions of Minnesotan tax dollars right now to fight that legislation from the Trump administration, the executive order saying we should have boys getting boy scholarships and girls getting girl scholarships, and boys shouldn't be in women's locker rooms. They're spending millions of Minnesota dollars right now fighting that. Angie Craig didn't back the Laking Riley Act. She puts a legal non-American citizens in front of American citizens. Again, I'm just trying to be an off-road to certainly for our base. There are hills I will die on: First Amendment and Second Amendment rights. Like, I die on those hills. I really care about the deficit and the debt. I think that's our biggest national security issue from an American federal government standpoint. I'm very concerned about that. But like, where I think I contrast is I'm common sense and reasonable. And their candidates, I don't think, are going to be either of those two things. Or they're certainly not now. They can try to pretend they're going to be reasonable when it comes time for a general election, but their records say anything but that.
I love that. I was digging into your website a little bit before we jumped on, and you do have a great issues pages that kind of lays out some of this. It looks like kind of some three of the like tenets of your campaign are common sense solutions at work, stronger American economy, and a safer nation. And I think that aligns with really what we saw coming out of the 2024 election. A lot of this. I want to chat a little bit about the economy because I know that's something that voters across the country really leaned into. We're obviously seeing, as much as everybody wants policies to change overnight and the economy to even out, it's obviously going to take a little bit of time. And we're not blaming anything on Donald Trump right now, but talk to us about your viewpoint on the economy, about how reducing some of those regulations, cutting some of that red tape, really leaning into some of this modernization. I loved on that modernization of the ag industry even, and some incentives there. But talk to us about how leaning into the American made, reducing those regulations, lowering taxes, and really giving some of that power back to American entrepreneurs, small business owners, our job creators can really spur what Democrats have been stifling.
Honestly, Becky, I think you answered all my questions. You said it. We need to build back the middle class. The working American class has left the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party has left them. We are not focused at a federal government of all the things you just said: repealing the red tape, enabling small businesses. The Democrats' government, shoot, Tim Walz shut down thousands of small businesses during COVID. Those haven't come back on board. If you look at some of the things that are happening right now with the federal government, tariffs, you didn't specifically mention tariffs. But yeah, they're causing some pain because the Trump administration is not accepting the status quo in Washington, which is just, we'll figure it out down the road. We'll continue to increase the national debt, which is at 37 trillion, exceeds our GDP right now, which is, that's the so what. Once we've hit that red line, that should be I know it's sad, but Americans just don't realize what a tripwire that is for our national debt, for our credit card debt for our country to exceed how much we make every year for our country's like earning salary. That's crazy, and it's a very big warning sign, and it's not tenable. So I guess the bottom line up front there is, I think that again, our debt is our national Achilles heel. It's more scary than Russia, China, North Korea combined. It's a big deal. And I think I forget the famous economist that said, spending is like getting drunk. And the more you spend, the drunker you get, the better you feel. However, there's always going to be a hangover. And the more you drink, the better it feels, but the longer the hangover. For the last 40 years, the American government's been drinking the Kool-Aid way too much, and we're due for a big hangover. And I respect that President Trump and his administration is trying to figure out a way to correct things, and America's due for a hangover. I hope we get through that process as quickly as possible. I'm not cavalier or aloof to the fact that if our economy isn't squared away, and at least at the current state that it is right now, 2 years from now, I don't win. But I'm not in this race so I can win. I'm in this race so we can build a better country. And if I don't get in because the economy is doing well, I at least respect that President Trump and his administration is taking the steps for the long term for our country. And that's what true leadership is. Certainly, I'm hopeful that some of these things take hold and we're in a better spot, and I'm confident that we will be. But yeah, this period right now, he's been in office 3 months. We've already stopped two regional wars, which were on the verge of becoming larger global wars. Those have been put to bed, and the tariffs are starting to work again. But the tariffs, they could work. And again, if you look at Trump's record, I like to say that the best metric for future success is past performance. And if you look at pretty much almost every one of Trump's foreign and domestic policies, the end state is a better normative standard than when the policy before he came in. So the status quo was always shifted to the side of being better for America. So I'm going to give him a chance on these tariffs as well.
Map out what the next few weeks and months are for your campaign without revealing any secrets. Traveling the state, are people opportunities for people to interact and see you on the campaign trail? What's the Schwarze campaign going to be doing?
Every single day, from the moment I wake up to the moment I rest my little peepers at the end of the night, I'm trying to improve in the Marine Corps what we call our fighting position. Whether that's calling and setting up donor and fundraising engagements or going to the BPOU events or Senate district events. I just wrapped up 7 of the 8 conventions. I was able to go to all but one of them. CD8 is coming up on May 3rd, so I'll be up there at that. I've heard that candidates aren't talking, but I'm still going to show up with my team. I'm still going to go walk the tables, hand out my folders, meet the delegates, and hope to earn their support. That's dollars and delegates, brother. You know it.
So you're traveling the state, meeting
Yeah.
with folks, and so there's a good chance that our listeners are going to come across you on the campaign trail, and they can also follow you on your website and on all social media accounts to track what's going on with you, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Adam, it was just an absolute pleasure and a joy to speak with you today. This is the exact type of conversations that we love to have with this podcast. And Becky and I, being her more than me, quasi-Republicans, we like to see candidates come on and talk in this type of way. We understand there's a need to engage the base, but there's also a need to speak to the broader electorate. And I think we'll talk about it after you're off, but I think Becky and I are going to probably come to the conclusion that you've hit the sweet spot here. And we really hope you continue to travel safe, get some success, and you're always welcome back on our podcast, okay?
Thanks, team. I appreciate having me on. Looking forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you
Thanks
so much. Becky, we just interviewed Adam Schwarze, a candidate for the U.S. Senate in Minnesota as a Republican. Your take?
I was very impressed. I haven't had the opportunity to meet him in person or hear him on the campaign trail. Obviously, perusing his website and articles about him is impressive just by looking at his resume, both directly military service, his degrees, very impressive. But I have to say, he's almost more impressive verbally. Hearing him, he seems to really get it. I think that he really seems to understand how to navigate the different aspects of the Republican Party process, the Republican Party in general. And I speaking right up my alley with focusing on the common sense side of things, that he's doing the donor work, that he's doing the work with all of the different groups that you need to come out of the endorsement primary process and have a fighting chance in the general. And it really was very impressed with him. Especially, again, if you look at his resume and hearing him list off his time in the military, his multiple degrees that he holds, he truly could do so much with his resume, with his history and background. And this is the type of candidate that tends to pull at my heartstrings and make me believe that you're really in it for the right reasons, right? Like you're not just in it for power, fame, and glory, because I think that he could continue to work his way up in the ranks of the military if he wanted to, or do other things. And it seems though he truly wants to fight for us. And that seems to come across. Very passionate guy.
Very much. I was incredibly impressed, and I stand by that the "tell us about yourself" response was probably one of the most impressive that I've heard. Yeah, I don't want to diminish his service in any way, but it was like doing an interview with Captain America because I'm always so appreciative and have the utmost respect for people that have worn our country's uniform in any arena, but particularly in the aftermath of 9/11 and what he's experienced and what he's gone through, the sacrifices he's made for our country, personal sacrifices that I'm sure he's also has endured. I thought his story was incredibly compelling and his demeanor. And what I also liked about him was it was a very normal conversation. And he was talking about normal in the sense of I could identify not anything with his military record, but just the nuts and bolts of the campaign of what he was discussing. I could see that he had that figured out and that he's running, I think, the type of campaign that Republicans aren't used to in this state recently, amount of times, which is a traditional raise money, talk to the delegates, and balance that in the right way. I completely agree with you. There's a lot of things he could be doing right now based on his resume, his life experiences. his demeanor and his leadership style, and the fact that he is decided to join this fight for the United States Senate, I think Republicans should be incredibly appreciative that someone of his caliber, his character, and his leadership skills is willing to carry the Republican flag in this fight. And I hope that the activists inside the Republican Party choose wisely in that process, because Adam Schwarze is going places.
Completely agree. I appreciate you lining that one up. It was a great conversation, and I'm very anxiously going to be watching him on the campaign trail, on his social medias, and tracking him as we go.
Speaking of campaign trail, we had I'll get your take on last night's State of the State speech.
Yes.
Why
I
don't you
think
kick
that
things off?
I think that is a great transition. So this was what, his seventh State of the State, Governor Walz's seventh State of the State address, was like mid 20-ish minutes. I don't think anything too wild and crazy came out of it. I think it was precisely what I would have expected to come out of him if I was on his campaign team or on his team and weighing all of the things he is weighing currently. So this comes when we just have a little less than a month of the regular 2025 session. And his speech definitely, I would say, leaned a little bit more national than state, if for being a state of the state. But we have to take into consideration who this Governor Walz is. He was the Democrat vice president nominee in the 2024 election. He's coming just off of that, still weighing, apparently, whether he is done with the national stage or not, if he's going to run for a third term, if he's going to throw his hat into the ring for president in 2028, what his next steps are. And I think this really showed that kind of maybe indecision about what his next step is going to be. We did see him lean a little bit. We'll chat about some of the specific topics. We leaned a little bit into the Democrat accomplishments, leaned for the DFL and GOP to work together in these final days, which of course we all know is going to be crucial to avoid a special session or whatever they're looking to do. And then we saw a lot of focus on pointing fingers at President Trump, the Trump administration, Republican controlled Congress, and all of that. Yeah, so that's my initial take. We'll chat a little bit more about some of these stuff, but I'm curious of a former Walz supporter, potentially still Walz supporter. What was your take? Did you glean any interest of what his next step might be, or did it surprise you in any way?
First of all, I still think he's going to run for a third term. That's where I continue to think he's going to land. But we'll see. I think that's, my opinion is just as relevant as the next person's. I don't know that he's made a final decision. But what I would say is that the speech last night, I hear a lot from Republicans that they're excited about the governor's race in this state because Walz has a national profile. That cuts both ways. Walz has a national profile for himself too. And last night he showcased that. And it showed a willingness, I think, on his part to nationalize as much as he can what he went through, what his being the VP under the Democratic nominee for president, Vice President Kamala Harris at the time. And so he's leaning into that. And so, yes, to the Republicans out there who keep saying Walz has a national profile and we're going to be able to fundraise on that, that works on the Walz side too. And I think that his speech reflected his new political standing as a national figure. And there's positives that come with that. There's negatives that come with that. Both sides can use that. But he leaned into that last night. And in terms of continuing to build anticipation and a discussion about what he's doing and where he's going to go, I don't think last night shut any doors as to where his decision can go. He can choose to run for a third term. And right now, if he chooses to run for a third term, I think he's in a very strong position to get reelected. I don't think there's any indicator out there to think that Governor Walz would not be the presumptive favorite if he were to run for a reelection. But the tenor and tone of his speech that it played on the national, I think also resonated, and it leans into a larger discussion I think that Democrats are having right now as to where is the heart and soul of the Democratic Party and where is the message. And he used the opportunity for those 20-ish minutes to give his state of the state address. And that was a state of a state address that, as you noted, mentioned some things about the state, but also had a national component. And so I think Walz is well aware of Governor Walz is well aware of the circumstances that he's in, that he is a two-term elected governor, that he has a clear path should he want to run for a third term, minimal, I think, announced opposition to him on the Republican side for governor, and he's got options. And what decision he will choose is ultimately up to him. And I don't have any insight to that, but I think he is leaning into every opportunity that he has.
I completely agree. Didn't shut any doors by any means. I have to chuckle just a little bit. And I think I did this after I don't remember which Democrat we had on, and they pointed the fingers at Trump, but it just, the whole pointing the fingers at Trump, and this is something obviously Leader Niska and Dameth and Johnson all really leaned into in their responses as well, is the Niska quote from Leader Niska was, unfortunately, what we saw here tonight is an extension of what we've seen from Democrats in Minnesota. Instead of talking about those issues in Minnesota and the challenges, they constantly want to engage in Trump deflection strategy where everything is the fault of Donald Trump. And that's just, again, I'm no Trump cheerleader here, but the state of Minnesota's, our outlook of our budget outlook, our where our money stands after spending an $18 billion surplus and raising taxes would be the same if Kamala Harris got elected, if Joe Biden was in office, or Donald Trump. And so it's just so convenient that it is Donald Trump, that it allows the Democrats to have this line of messaging. And hey, exploit it away, because why wouldn't you? If your Republicans were hitting on the fact that Walz never mentioned the word deficit while talking about some spending reductions and weeding out fraud, but why would he? That's not obviously something he's going to lean into. So I don't blame him for that, but it is just so convenient, right? That this is such a strategy that Democrats can use. Walz really leaned into how Minnesota is a good place. It's the federal government that's a mess, right? It's their fault that we're in this mess, and that Minnesota is setting it up to have Minnesota kind of being the beacon on the hill for what other states and our nation can do as a whole if we have somebody like at the helm. And I think he did exactly what he needed to do. I internally chuckle a little bit because it seems so transparent on so many levels, but no real woohoo moments, no real. A biggest applause line was leaning into the fraud aspect. Obviously that is playing well. Republicans are getting a lot of accolades for that. Democrats are obviously seeing that this is something that Minnesotans are liking, so that was great. I think it was like I said, no huge woohoos, absolutely no mess ups. He did what he needed to do. He leaves the door open. And I think that Democrats came out feeling great. I don't think any Minnesota watched that and maybe rolled their eyes like me, but I don't think you watch that and see a far left flaming liberal leader of the state right now. So it was fine.
Yeah, correct. And the other thing that I think it sets up is that the problem that Republicans are going to have in this state is the Trump approval ratings and the economy. And I've been consistent. Talking about, I think it's too early to determine what the anchor will be, what pressure Trump will have on the down ballot or how it will impact it. But the bottom line is, if the polling numbers continue to show where they're at and the economy is where it's going to be a very tough election cycle, as it traditionally is in the midterm of the president's the midterm of the president's term. But this is a little unique and historical, and you can listen back to other podcast episodes where I discuss that the natural rules sometimes just don't apply to Trump. But we'll see what 2026 is going to look like for Republicans in this state. But there's going to be, I think, some headwinds, and the trajectory and the political environment could be challenging for Republicans if the economy doesn't improve and Americans don't start feeling better about where they're standing.
Completely agree. Continuing on our chat about upcoming elections, we did not record last week, so I want to just touch briefly on the special election in Senate District 6. Again, this is to replace what I'm referring to as recently disgraced former Senator Justin Eichhorn. So there was the primary about a week and a half ago, and wow, was it a blowout. So we did discuss this a little bit on recent episodes of the candidates in the race. Carrie Heinzman, the wife of State Representative Heinzman, came just shy of 50%. She got almost 47% of the vote. The second place candidate was John Howe at just over 15%, and then Jennifer Carnahan came in at 11%. And then the
Aw.
rest of the candidates were all under 10.
That awe is a legally allowed expression of the First
Yes, it
Amendment.
sure is. I think we, in our conversations on air and behind the scenes, both thought that Heinzman seemed to be the one that was going to come out on top. I don't necessarily know that I expected it to be by this large of a margin. To crush second place by over 30% is incredible. Cheers to her. She knows the district, knows the people, has been doing the work. And again, she, as a reminder, she was a former Trump director of CD8. Her husband does represent House District 6B. She is the mother of 6. She raised $55,000 in the few, I think, 3 short weeks leading up to the primary. The next up in money was Steve, who maybe, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm sorry, Steve, who had 18,000, and that was largely self-funded. So just crushed it at the doors in the fundraising and at the polls.
One of our guests, Kip Christensen, was actively involved in that race on behalf of working with Carrie Heinzman. So congratulations to Heinzman's campaign and to Kip for the great work up there. It was a very significant victory. And one thing to note, of course, it's in your show notes, that the Action for Liberty candidate, Doug Kern, got, I believe, 7th place, if my math is correct. So he got 4.99%. And normally I would just round up to 5, but because it's Action for Liberty, I'm not going to. And that was a very strong show of force by Heinzman and her campaign. Kudos to her and her campaign for winning that primary. And democracy worked. As I said, it was either going to be one of two things I would be saying. And that night I did wrap myself a bit in the American flag discreetly and was very proud of democracy and that it worked. The system worked, and now we have a general election that's coming up, and I think when we had a discussion about the race with Will Davis and Preah, I think we all agreed that this was a safe seat for the Republicans, but stranger things have happened.
Yeah. Like you said, the special election for this seat is on April 29th. This upcoming Tuesday, absentee voting is open as of the release of this podcast. If you live in Senate District 6, go Heinzman.
That's right. All right.
Now the juicy stuff.
The juicy stuff.
Do you want to kick us off?
There's been an interesting few weeks. There's been a little bit of a dust up between Action for Liberty and Republicans in this state. And it's been heating up a bit. Action for Liberty is a liberty-minded grassroots group that I think has no redeeming quality or value to the Republican apparatus in this state. And they have been, since recently, they have been elevated a bit because of leadership changes at the Republican Party in Minnesota. They've been getting a little bit more access and entree. And this has created a bit of a ripple because Action for Liberty's works, I think, very aggressively to recruit candidates that will challenge Republican incumbents. They will recruit candidates that I consider to be somewhat unelectable, questionable past, questionable backgrounds. And they also message so hard and aggressive against other Republicans in just incredibly racist and disparaging ways. And this has boiled up now. The Action for Liberty has unfortunately had some success with getting some of their candidates into leadership positions. Most recently, after the leadership election for party chair, they got Brett Bussman, who is the new chair of CD7, to be elected the chair of the 7th CD. And the problem that creates is Republicans haven't won statewide since 2006, since Tim Pawlenty won in 2006. And there has been this internal dynamic that has really metastasized in probably the last 10 plus years, where Republicans just cannot seem to play well together inside the sandbox. And one of the worst people in the kind of sandbox is Action for Liberty. They have a litmus test. If you're not an uber conservative, if you're not basically to the right of whoever they think is the farthest right, you're not aligned with them. And it creates real problems inside the party because Minnesota is on a good day. It is a Vikings purple state. By the way, it's draft day. That's why I'm wearing my Vikings purple today. But on a good day, it's Vikings purple. This is not a red state. It's a blue state. And on a very rare occasion, will this state will be Vikings purple. And in order for Republicans to succeed in this state, I remain convinced that the only way that Republicans can win in this state is to build the type of necessary coalition that can work together broadly, broad tent of Republicans. Action for Liberty doesn't think that way. And they pick fights. They are divisive, they are corrosive, and they are a cancer. And they're, I believe, the largest impediment to Republicans succeeding in this state is Action for Liberty and the work that they do. And where this will now become a problem is in CD7. And you can say to yourself, it's Congresswoman Michelle Fischbach. She wins by great margins. Why does it really matter who the chair of the 7 CD is? Here's why it matters. It matters for this reason. It matters because in order to win statewide, Republicans need to maximize their votes in every area of the state. I have consistently said that it is no surprise to me that Republicans haven't won statewide since 2006. Because you know what happened in 2006? Keith Ellison was elected to Congress in the 5th Congressional District. And Keith Ellison built an absolute machine in the 5th Congressional District and maximized every vote that could be gained in Minneapolis, and is also done in the 4th too. The Democrats, if you look at an election result map, you will see that the Democrats do very well in the urban cores of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Republicans do fantastic in statewide. Republicans do fantastic statewide. The problem is that there's more people for the Democrats to get their votes out in 5 and 4 in those congressional districts, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so when you elect a goofball who's a flat earther to chair the 7th Congressional District, and it creates infighting and tension inside the party apparatus, you are taking a target-rich environment where votes should be collected in mass. And every legal vote, they should just be electoral machines, just like the Democrats have in 5 and 4 and in other parts of the state. And by electing someone who has no experience in winning elections, other than winning his own apparently, who is a flat earther, who believes in every crazy conspiracy theory that you can, and doesn't play well in the sandbox, what that creates is distractions for Republicans that they simply cannot afford to have. And so when Republicans elect someone like that in CD7, and Democrats have professionals in CD5 and CD4 in their target-rich vote areas, this is why Republicans lose elections. And it's these type of election decisions that the party is currently making inside that are going to creating type of long-term problems. They're going to once again provide a hurdle for Republicans in 2026.
Absolutely. I think first I have to say, when I was executive director of the state party, the CD7 board was one of my favorites. Craig Bishop has done incredible stuff in CD7. The
He
board
is such a good guy.
There's so many incredible workers out there. And this was all bubbling up with Fischbach when I was there. And I completely agree. I don't worry about her or her team. They're incredible. But it's where then we see the impact down ballot, right? We know that a lot of normal common sense voters in the 7th Congressional District are going to be Congresswoman Fischbach supporters. But then we see the chipping away down ballot, or folks who just don't show up to vote and really impact that statewide for the U.S. Senate, for the governor's race, for some of these other red House races. We know Eric Mortensen, the Action for Liberty president, has recently said that he thinks that they need to primary all Republicans in the Minnesota House because they did not support their signature bill. And it just is one of those things. And I will say, maybe when I came out of college, I was in the Tea Party era where it seemed great to have these purity tests. And then you spend some time actually working in government and seeing what's necessary. And it's frustrating to see groups and individuals focus on maybe the 5, 10, 20% Republican candidate or elected official, that 5, 10, 20% that they're not voting the way they want them to or not doing. And so they'd rather throw the baby out with the bathwater and get a Democrat involved who is going to not be on their side maybe at 80% of the time. the math isn't mathin', as they say. And I think one person who I appreciate has been outspoken about this in a recent article is Representative Walter Hudson. Was somebody who he was very open about the fact that he formerly was aligned with some of the beliefs of Action for Liberty, was friends with their founder, but then he got into the House and got a quote crash course on how the legislative process actually works. And he says that this confrontational approach just doesn't work. It's not the way to do it. And you need to have a little bit more understanding that, and these are my words, not his, but that compromise sometimes needs to be part of the game, right? That to get my thing passed, I sometimes have to lean a little bit away and into something that somebody else needs passed as well. And so it's really frustrating because I think, again, like you said, the internal firing squad, we're just our own worst enemy. The Democrats here in the state have some of this, but not to the public, or certainly not in the public realm and airing their dirty laundry as much as Republicans do. But this is something that we are seeing with the fishback stuff. They're claiming credit for outing David Hand. They claim credit for Royce White. And then we see, and this is some things that I know you've seen firsthand and have talked a little bit about on Twitter, but the way they conduct themselves and just in an inappropriate manner in attacks on weight and look and appearance of some of their critics, and some of the really nasty ways that they conduct themselves it's just really unfortunate that it's associated with the words Republican in Minnesota, and it's tough. It's icky.
No, it absolutely is. One of the things I think that there are a lot of people who want to be in this state, it's called Republican cops. There are a lot of people right now who want to act as if they can tell people who is and isn't a Republican. We have elected officials who like to do that. We have some people in Action for Liberty. We have some people at the state party who like to do that. One thing I have never been, nor will I ever be, and this was consistent when I was deputy chair, I ain't a Republican cop. There were so many times that when I was in party leadership, we got asked to mediate issues. And I would stand up in front of BPOUs and said, I ain't a Republican cop. We are a party of local control. You can come to the executive committee. We can talk about issues, but I don't have some badge. And right now there are people out there, I think inside the Republican Party, people in party office, people at the legislature and other activists who want to act as if they're Republican cops and get to decide who gets to play in the sandbox. Let me tell you, Becky, my philosophy on something, and push back, tell me if you think I'm wrong, because we know you know how to do that. I recognize that my view of being a Republican is not where the majority of Republicans are. I recognize that how I view the Republican Party, what it should stand for, and the issues that I identify with might not work in Carver County, might not work in Olmsted County, might not work in Cass, Cook, or in other parts of the state. But I understand that if I'm going to be part of the Republican coalition, that I have to play well in the sandbox, and I have to be self-aware of my views and how they may not align with others. The problem with Action for Liberty and the problem with what they're doing right now is they are kicking people out of the sandbox. They're saying, they just don't play well with others. And the reality is there's simply not enough Republicans in this state for Republican, first of all, legislators and party officers and other people acting like Republican cops and saying who is and isn't a Republican. And then to have this group, which used to be somewhat rogue, but now has been mainstreamed and has been embraced by the party apparatus, sadly, deciding who is and isn't a Republican. All this does is create infighting and tension. And let's talk about Congresswoman Fishbach for a second. We discussed this a lot in 2024. We talked about the concerns with the endorsement process. And I consistently said on this podcast and in media interviews that the biggest failing was not just the endorsement of Royce White, it's the fact that Congresswoman Fishbach was not endorsed by her local Republicans. I cannot begin to tell you how ridiculous of a world it is that Congresswoman Michelle Fishbach does not get her endorsement by acclamation and voice at every single convention. To think that she's not a Republican worthy of being endorsed by the Republican Party simply defies all common sense and logic. And the type of people that are now in the leadership of the CD7 are the type of people that are going to want to turn the screws to her. What sense does that make? It doesn't make any bit of sense. And this is exactly why Republicans can't have nice things. So there will be people who will say, it's CD7, Michael, there or Michael and Becky, it's CD7. Fishbach wins, Congresswoman Fishbach wins by great margins. No, it's not that. It's the people who work with Fishbach behind the scenes in the party apparatus. They're going to be turning the screws to her. And she doesn't deserve it. And it hurts the ability for Republicans to win statewide. This is an organization, Action for Liberty, that does, as you correctly note, absolutely disparages people personally, their physical appearance, racist remarks about elected officials. I've seen racist remarks about Representative Hudson. I've seen racist remarks about Speaker Demuth. That's not the way to talk to people. That's not to say that politics doesn't have an edge to it. And you'd be hard pressed to say to someone who ran a blog called Minnesota Democrats Exposed that I've ever been afraid to throw a punch, and I've taken some punches and I've thrown some punches. The reality is that's not the way to speak to people. I didn't engage in that type of rhetoric. I never have. And if you're a Republican Party trying to figure out how to win statewide, engaging in racist attacks on your fellow Republicans or anyone is just simply not a great strategy to win people over. And the candidacy of Royce White that's entered, this cancer that's been on the Republican Party. This is where Action for Liberty loves this stuff. Because Royce White's the type of guy that will call people inappropriate statements and talk to them in derogatory ways, as if that's some badge of courage and honor. I think, honestly, it takes greater courage to sit across from someone and have a conversation that you can have and disagree, although I hate the phrase agree to disagree, but just disagree with people and be willing to have that and leave the table rather than just insulting people. And these juvenile attacks, it is literally, I can describe it no better than this. It is a corrosive infighting that will suck energy away from the Republicans' larger goal, which is winning in 2026. They have an open U.S. Senate state race in this state. The House Republicans will be up. The Senate will be up. And there'll be constitutional races. Governor Walz will be up for re-election. It'll be an open seat. There's going to be many opportunities for Republicans to succeed. And this type of infighting is part of the problem. It's now in the 7th Congressional District. It's taken over CD2. There was just a convention in CD2 where Action for Liberty did very well. And the messaging that I heard from some people at that convention was about holding Republicans accountable. I had an activist on social media talk about how someone who gave a speech was referring to other Republicans as maggots that they disagreed with. The animosity that Republicans in this state have towards other Republicans that they disagree with. On these 80, like as Reagan said, you're not an enemy if we disagree only 20% of the time. Republicans like Action for Liberty are more concerned about the 5, 10, 15, 20% that they disagree with someone rather than their 80%, someone that they would consider to be an 80% ally. Republicans are not going to win that way. They're simply not going to win this way.
I think you rounded it out perfectly. Last thing I'm going to comment on is we've talked about frequently of my background working for Congressman Emmer and Congressman Jason Lewis's reelection. And we saw exactly that. Groups like this, individuals involved, those two men were not conservative enough for them, which is just mind-boggling that Tom Emmer and Jason Lewis were not deemed fit to pass the purity test, that Michelle Bachmann had started to not be pure enough of a Republican conservative for groups like this. It just literally makes me laugh because if you listen to these individuals and see their body of work in their time in Congress, they are conservative. They fight for the cause. They are fighting the good fight for the Constitution, for the Republican Party, for our conservative values. And it just is where I can't fathom and figure out what the end goal really is for this. But you wrapped it up perfectly. This is just an issue, a problem, and hopefully gets better before it gets worse.
That's right. Becky, we've come to the end. This is it for you. You're not going away forever, but this is it.
Yes.
By the time this episode comes out, there could be
There could be a
happening.
baby. Yeah, but we're real close.
Becky, I want to just say that I wish you the absolute best. You and your family the absolute best. I hope your husband gets rest. I think he's doing okay. By the way, you're still married, correct?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, that's wonderful. And I also want to make sure that the podcast gets exclusivity of the first interview, with the new edition. And so we just want to wish you the best, and we look forward to you being back.
I can't wait. I'll be listening every week and paying attention on Twitter. So I'll be ready with a lot of opinions, I'm sure.
With that, we want to thank all of you for listening to this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us at our website and across all social media platforms at BB BreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return sans Becky for a little bit, but with me. Stay tuned for more.
Bye.